Every weekend, millions of people order the same drink. Gin and tonic and vodka tonic are classics that hide a terrible secret. This bitterness in the tongue once allowed Europe to conquer half the planet. A modern tonic contains 83 milligrams of medicinal substance per liter. Colonial tonic contained 1,000 milligrams, 12 times more. People died collecting seeds from trees that produce this compound. Nations fought over the forests that gave them this cure for a deadly disease. The Quechua knew its secrets centuries before the arrival of Europeans. Jesuit missionaries accidentally saved Europe from malaria. The drink in your hand is the ghost of medicine, empire, and power. This glowing compound is called quinine. Its source is a tree that grows where most plants die. Cinchona officinalis lives at an altitude of 1,500 to 2,500 meters in the Andes of Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. Temperatures here change dramatically between day and night. Cloud cover creates constant humidity but prevents frost. There are more than 23 species of cinchona, each adapted to its own harsh survival conditions. The Quechua people have used the bark for centuries, but not against malaria. They chewed it to stop shivering during the cold mountain nights. The intense bitterness of the bark generated heat in the body and helped to survive at altitude. When Europeans arrived in the 16th century, they brought something unprecedented to the Andes. Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest strain of malaria, reached the Americas through transatlantic contact. A remedy for tremors accidentally turns out to be a cure for tropical parasites. By 1630, malaria had turned Rome into a death trap. The disease killed popes and cardinals, sparing no one. Jesuit missionaries in Peru noticed something amazing. The Quechua anti-shiver remedy cured European fevers. It was accidental medicine, a cold medicine that killed tropical parasites. When the bark arrived in Rome in 1631, it worked. For the first time in centuries, the fevers subsided, and the highest church officials survived. For 200 years, no one understood why it worked. The bark was ground into powder, mixed with wine, and the deadly temperatures were watched to subside. The Jesuits called it Jesuit bark, but the mechanism of action remained a mystery. In 1820, French chemists Joseph Bien-Aimé Caventou and Pierre-Joseph Pelletier isolated the active compound. They named it quinine, and suddenly the tropics were conquered by European empires. Before the discovery of quinine, Africa was called the white man's grave. The mortality rate of Europeans in West Africa exceeded 50% annually. Quinine changed this equation and turned medicine into a geopolitical force. By 1850, the death rate of British troops from malaria had dropped by 86%. It was not just medicine, it was power over continents. The British Empire used quinine to colonize India, and the Dutch used it to control Indonesia. That gin and tonic you order at the bar is not the invention of bartenders. This is the way British colonial officers in India took their mandatory daily medicine since 1825. 2 ounces of gin masked the bitterness of quinine and kept it alive. By the end of the 19th century, quinine had become the most valuable commodity on Earth. Every gram came from South America's shrinking forests. Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia understood what they were controlling and banned the export of seeds under penalty of death. European empires could not build their power on a supply chain they did not control. They sent thieves disguised as botanists. Most of the expeditions failed, the seeds rotted in the sea, and the seedlings died during transportation. The British sent expeditions in the 1860s. All the seeds they stole contained less than 3% quinine and turned out to be useless. Then came Charles Ledger, a British merchant living in Bolivia. Ledger didn't know the forests, but he knew the man who knew them best. Manuel Incra Mamani was a local guide who could identify 29 varieties of cinchona at a glance. In 1865, he found a super tree in the mountains of Bolivia. The bark of this tree contained 13% quinine, 3 times more than any known variety. Mamani collected 14 pounds of seeds and Ledger sold them to the Dutch government for 100 pounds. The British refused the purchase, making the strategic mistake of the century. Mamani tried to collect more seeds for later sales. In 1871, the Bolivian authorities caught him red-handed. They beat him, threw him into prison, and left him in his cell to die. His crime was helping the Europeans steal Bolivia's greatest natural resource. Mamani died in custody, but his seeds had already traveled across the ocean. The Dutch took the stolen seeds to Java and planted 17,000 hectares of plantations. By 1918, they had not just a plantation, but a cartel. They called it the Keene Bureau and established control over world prices. British India could not compete. French Algeria failed. By 1939, 97% of the world's quinine came from one place, the island of Java. The Dutch monopoly seemed unbreakable, but then World War II broke out and everything changed in a matter of weeks. In 1942, Japan invaded Java. Within weeks, the Allies lost access to quinine. American soldiers in the Pacific began to die from malaria faster than from combat. The crisis revealed a strategic catastrophe. Dependence on a natural monopoly was too dangerous. The pharmaceutical industry needed a solution that could be produced in laboratories. Scientists tried to synthesize quinine for decades, but it was too difficult. However, in 1934, German scientists at Bayer synthesized a related compound, chloroquine. It was cheaper than quinine and easier to produce. Initially, it worked great. By 1947, chloroquine had replaced the natural medicine. The pharmaceutical industry won. But what they don't advertise is that resistance to chloroquine began in 1957, just 12 years after its introduction. By the 1960s, resistant strains had spread throughout the world. They introduced mefloquine. Resistance appeared after 5 years. They introduced atovaquone. Resistance appeared the same year. Every synthetic anti-malarial drug followed the same pattern: rapid success, then complete failure. The malaria parasite seemed to mock every attempt by man to deceive nature. Yet the tonic behind every bar in the world contains a compound that has never developed widespread resistance. Today, malaria kills 610,000 people every year, 1,670 deaths every day. 75% of victims are children under 5 years of age in sub-Saharan Africa. Children bear the heaviest burden of this disease. Here's what the pharmaceutical industry doesn't want you to know. Quinine has never developed widespread resistance. Despite 400 years of continuous use, the malarial parasite still responds to treatment with quinine. Research in the 1920s and 30s showed something surprising. Crude cinchona bark extract was equally effective or superior to purified quinine against resistant strains. The natural formula worked better than the laboratory copy. Remember that gin and tonic with 1,000 milligrams of quinine? The real version never stopped working. While synthetic drugs failed one after another, the natural compound continued to kill parasites without developing significant resistance. However, the global manufacturing infrastructure collapsed after the war. The plantations of Java disappeared. The Andean forests were cut down completely. The pharmaceutical market for anti-malarial drugs is worth $4 billion annually and is dominated by artemisinin-based therapies. However, resistance is already emerging in Rwanda and Uganda. The pattern is repeated. There is a crisis of resistance to synthetic drugs, while the natural compound that works remains abandoned. The reason is cruel. Cinchona cannot be monopolized. The tree needs specific conditions: cool temperatures from 10 to 21 degrees Celsius, high humidity, no frost. It thrives at an altitude of 1,500 to 2,500 meters on mountain slopes, and the Dutch have discovered an important secret: trimming. When a tree is cut at the base, it regenerates with higher concentrations of the drug than the original trunk. It is a renewable source of the most effective anti-malarial drug on Earth, but knowledge of its cultivation was buried after World War II. Dutch scientific works ended up in archives, and seed banks were abandoned. Patent protection for synthetic drugs created high profits, and cinchona was just a tree. Anyone with suitable soil height can grow it. Parts of Hawaii, the Appalachian Highlands, and Northern California fall within the temperature and altitude range of cinchona. Small-scale cultivation is possible, but the systematic knowledge required for economically viable distributed production is lacking. Next time you order a gin and tonic, taste that bitterness on your tongue. It's not just a taste, it's a memory of what the pharmaceutical companies decided to hide from you. The same corporations that profit from $4 billion worth of anti-malarial drugs each year have no financial incentive to revive the production of natural quinine. Every time resistance to chloroquine emerges, the industry develops new synthetics instead of returning to quinine. Each new drug buys another decade of profit before resistance renders it useless. And quinine continues to work after 4 centuries of use. The industry has billions of dollars to keep these decisions secret. We have something more powerful, truth, but truth only matters when it is shared with others. Nature cannot be patented, but knowledge about it can be suppressed. If you think this knowledge is worth preserving, subscribe to our channel. Help us build a library that belongs to everyone because together we can ensure they never suppress it again.